It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity.
Sorry, my automation software mumbled up there. You know, a lot of people have asked me why do I actually pause and break the show in half like that? Because on a video streaming side, I have to be able to upload these as two different segments for simplicity's sake. And it helps us to break the program in half so that each segment is a half hour. For the record, by the way, I announced it yesterday. On Monday, we're going to be moving to a 2-hour format. No longer 1 hour. We're going to break to a 2-hour format. And that way, when we do the program, we won't have to be so rapid-paced because, you know, there's so much, folks, out there right now that's coming down to us that it's hard for me to get it all into a 1-hour window. I mean, I'm telling you, I could go on from now until lunchtime and not even begin to touch on all the news that's out there. And the problem, of course, is that, you know, you got to look at it this way. Here's the analogy I'll draw you. If I had a machine gun with a cyclical rate like one of those ones that you see those Gatling guns strapped up in a helicopter that fires basically a steady stream of 6,000 rounds a minute, I couldn't fire all the ammunition these people are throwing at us. I just couldn't. There's too much of it. Literally too much. We're talking about a stunning amount of tyranny and treason that is going on every single day. And, you know, the mainstream media is not touching any of it. So if you're not getting it from me or somebody who is a patriot like me, then you're not getting it. And that's the problem. I don't know how else to resolve the issue for you, but I'm just telling you what the reality is. There's so much of it out there, I can't even cover it all in 1 hour. So we're moving to a 2-hour format. One thing you can do, by the way, is you can listen to a couple of the other hosts on the Liberty News Radio Network where we're transmitting this information as we speak now. And you can capture this show streaming live every day at 712-432-6623. You can just call from your phone. And if you got a speakerphone, you can leave it on the counter. And for all intents and purposes, have your coffee in the morning and you're getting AVN like it was on the radio until we have this other local radio deal worked out. And by the way, when you hear what we're doing with the Dream Team, you're going to be blown away. The other phone number that you can use is area code 213-992-4323. Now, that program is on at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's the 6 a.m. show is tomorrow's 6 a.m. show will be today's show. Then the 6 p.m. version will be, the 6 a.m. show is yesterday's show. The 6 p.m. show tonight will be this show. So, because we actually broadcast live at 8 to 9, right? And it's shortly going to be 8 to 10. So, on Monday. So, anyway, the upshot is, get on there. If you don't have a computer and you don't have access to it that way, you can capture us streaming right there. You can also find more information about it by going to our website and our Facebook page. I'm going to post those phone numbers up so that you guys have them. And I'm also working on an iPhone, and an Apple version will allow you to just download and forget the video. It's too heavy for a phone for your data plan. But what it will allow you to do is stream down the audio portion in an MP3. And you'll be able to listen to the show that way as well, live and or podcasted. All right, I want to focus on this right now because this is really bad stuff. The Obama administration is using the housing department, which is called HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to diversify neighborhoods. I tell you what, when you hear this, you're going to be blown away. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is imposing a new rule. Wait till you hear it. This is a perfect example, by the way, of administrative agencies that pass, for all intents and purposes, law, but call it a rule, which is a violation of the Constitution, because the Constitution clearly tells us that no body other than Congress may pass a law. In other words, there is no legislative body other than Congress's. And yet these groups, the HUD administration and all of these other, the DEA, the FBI, the ATF, the CIA, all of these groups are outside the Constitution. The USDA, the EPA, list them, there's thousands of them. They are imposing a new rule that will allow the Fed to track diversity in America's neighborhoods and then push policies upon us to provide changes that they deem necessary based on their rules of discrimination. Man, this has got Atlas Shrugged writ large all over it. So here's the deal. They're going to come into your neighborhood. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, this is the same group, by the way, that forbade in HUD housing for you to own a firearm until somebody finally got that overturned in the Supreme Court. But this is called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Act. Or not even an act, because if it was an act, it was an act of Congress, right? So they don't use the word act. I apologize. Let me clarify that. It will require HUD to gather data on segregation and discrimination in every single neighborhood in America and try to remedy it. Now, there's where the rub comes. It's one thing to gather the data. When you then take the data and you say, we're going to now use this information to create a change, a social engineering change, and we're going to use taxpayer money to do it, now you've got tyranny, because here's where it runs. Here's what's going to happen next. They're going to take diversified neighborhoods outside of, they're going to start with the major cities, of course. So let's pick a neighborhood in St. Louis, okay? So you go to a suburban neighborhood outside St. Louis, the city itself proper, and they're going to find a neighborhood in a small enclave of McMansions out there, and they're going to say, hey, guess what? Here's the problem. You don't have enough black people living in here, or you don't have enough Hispanic people living in here, or you don't have enough Muslim people living here, and so we're going to force you to sell homes at a discounted rate to them. Watch. This policy is absolute tyranny, and if you're not aware of it, I tell you what. Here's what HUD Secretary Sean Donovan says as he unveils the federal rule at the NAACP convention in July. Now, mark my words and listen to what I just told you. The HUD Secretary unveiled this federal ruling at where? The NAACP, National Association of Colored Persons. Bingo! That's what I'm talking about when I tell you to monitor and use your critical thinking skills. They don't, no one in this article, and this is a Fox News or Faux News article, they don't specify and spell out NAACP. They ought to, because what that tells you is that the HUD Secretary is appealing to that particular group, telling them you're going to benefit. He didn't do this on Fox News. Why not? Why didn't he do this on a national press conference on C-SPAN? Because if the average American knew about it, they'd be flipping their wig. That's why. Here's his quote. Unfortunately, in too many of our hardest hit communities, no matter how hard a child or her parents work, the life chances of that child, even her lifespan, is determined by the zip code she grows up in. This is simply wrong. Pause. Wow. So, what they're going to do, and here's my prediction. And by the way, a lot of these have come right. Here's my prediction. They're going to force integration in upscale white neighborhoods, and then they're going to take trash heaps like Detroit, and they're going to offer benefits to people, white people, who will move there to try to raise those places up. This isn't a racist issue, folks. They're making it one. And I'm not a racist for pointing it out and analyzing and recognizing the future of this. So anyone who wants to say that is an absolute liar. And you can prove it because you're going to have the critical thinking skills to know exactly and have the capability to show the proof right here of what they're trying to do. They announced it at an NAACP convention. That's racist in and of itself, isn't it? Number one. Number two, he's telling us exactly what he's going to do. Parents who are in the hardest hit communities, no matter how hard they work or how hard that child works, they don't have the same opportunity to grow up as everybody else. So what that's telling us is that they are going to use this discrimination policy, federally mandated, and this is discrimination. Make no mistake about it. Just like there's reverse racism, there is reverse discrimination. And this is what it's going to be. They're going to pay people or penalize white people for moving out of a Detroit or a New York City or any of the other decaying, liberal, progressive dung heaps that have been created all over the United States of America in every liberal preserve. And then they're going to offer or force you to sell, or they're going to subsidize black people and Hispanics to move into white neighborhoods, and they're going to pay to help them get there. You watch, I guarantee you, the next announcement will be, if you're black and you want to live in this white neighborhood, we will help you and we'll subsidize the cost of that housing. Bet money on it. Here's where the rubber meets the road. Data from this discrimination database will be used along with what? Zoning laws, housing finance policy, infrastructure planning, and transportation to alleviate alleged discrimination and segregation. So, here's your proof. They're going to pass zoning requirements and laws that will force people to integrate and be integrated, whether it's by normal process of financial means or whatever the case may be, or even just desire, right? I mean, there are people in black and white communities who say, I don't really want to live around the other group. I don't care whether, and that doesn't have to mean that they're racist. It just means that they have more in common with their group. And I'm tired, frankly, of the racist diatribe that has been ripping and shredding this country apart, promoted by a racist himself. Everybody recognizes Barack Obama as a black man. Well, what about his white half? Does anybody mention that? No. So when you talk about this Trayvon Martin crap and all this nonsense, let me tell you something. All of this is nothing other than a shield for this government to impose policies and restrictions and utilize the bully pulpit and their tyrannical police power to demand and force retribution for slavery, which happened 150 years ago, that neither you nor I nor anyone else around you was responsible for. And frankly, I'm sick and tired of it. And you should be too. What they're going to do is they're going to change zoning laws and housing finance policy. Now listen to that word, housing finance policy. Anytime you change policy, there's no oversight. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to start working with banks and finance organizations to subsidize or guarantee or back loans that you can't get because you're white, but you can get if you're black or you're brown. Or maybe yellow. I don't know. But, you know, it's interesting, by the way. You notice that Asians are never included in any of this. You know why? Because Asians do fairly well as a community. They stick together. They have families. They stick together as family groups. They stick together as a community, and they buy amongst themselves and sell amongst themselves. They're not riddled with drugs and crime and violence. Not like some of the other minority communities. So instead of complaining and bellyaching and whining about how bad their plight is in the Hispanic and black community, quite frankly, why don't you emulate what the Asians are doing and emulate what the Jewish have done for millennia? Buy and sell amongst yourselves, raise yourselves up, and stop making excuses. You know, the Chinese were brought over here as slaves to work on the railroads and in many, many, many other undesirable positions as well. But you don't hear Asians complaining and screaming bloody murder about it. I'm not picking on the blacks here exclusively. I'm just saying that, frankly, you know, these scumbags out there and racial agitators out there like Jackson and Sharpton and these other rich scumbags who promote and agitate race as the primary problem in the United States are the problem themselves. They're going to change infrastructure planning and transportation to alleviate alleged discrimination and segregation. Specifics of the proposed rule are lacking. Oh, geez, you got to be kidding me. No kidding. I'm not surprised at all. You know why? Because there aren't any specifics to it. They're going to do this on a subjective, not an objective basis. And here's what you need to understand. If you don't know the definitions of subjective and objective, do me a favor when this program ends and go find out what they mean. Subjective is based on my desire. Objective means it applies to all of us across the board, not just based on my particular intuition, desires, wishes, dreams, whims, hopes, or otherwise. And here's the problem. Subjectively, the people running this program in HUD are going to utilize their personal biases and their belief system to apply these rules. And that means it's no longer the rule of law, it is the rule of tyrants, traitors, and lawlessness. And that is the new America we live in. Now published in the Federal Register and undergoing a 60-day comment period, the rule, quote, does not prescribe or enforce specific policies, end quote. So what that means is all they're doing is laying down the rule. Then they get to define it later. That's where the verbicide comes in, people. Just like the health care bill, they get the rule passed or the law passed. Then they write policy after policy after policy after policy that no one sees, no one's accountable for, and are written by a bunch of folks that are bureaucrats who benefit themselves or their roles or positions in an effort to achieve whatever this desired bias is. I'm telling you, you've seen it in thousands of instances. This should not be happening again. And quite honestly, I don't understand why there aren't more groups who go out there during these 60-day comment periods and put in the equivalent of a friend of the court brief to argue against this kind of thing. This should never be a rule in the Federal Register, because once it hits the Federal Register, it is de facto law. People go to prison for it. People are fined for it. Businesses are closed and bankrupted over it. And I'm telling you, the Federal Register is where literally hundreds of thousands of laws exist that were written and passed by unnamed, unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats who, for all intents and purposes, are breaking the constitutional requirement that only Congress can pass a law. Here's a critic. One critic says it smacks of utopian idealism. Oh boy, that's an understatement. Quote, this is just the latest of a series of attempts by HUD to socially engineer the American people, says Ed Pinto. He's from the American Enterprise Institute. It started with public housing and urban renewal, which failed spectacularly in the 50s and 60s. They tried it again in the 90s when they wanted to transform housing finance, do away with down payments, and the result was millions of foreclosures and national financial collapse. End quote. Boy, that is a true statement. Some fear the rule will open the floodgates to lawsuits by HUD. See, here's where it comes now. HUD passes the policy. This is what it is. This is what you got to do. Then they file lawsuits to bankrupt anyone who doesn't work with them. Banking, cities, communities, zoning organizations. They will penalize you and win by attrition, financial attrition, because nobody has the staff of football teams worth of lawyers like the HUD has. And no city, county, community organization, banking industry, or individual bank can afford to withstand the financial onslaught and the tidal wave of litigation because they don't have the financial resources to do it. But we're paying the enemy in this case, which is going to be the HUD phalanx bank of lawyers, to sue our own communities into resolving and meeting these policies and guidelines and goals, which are in fact law. Some fear the rule will open the floodgates to lawsuits by HUD, a weapon the department has already used in places like Westchester County, New York, where mayors and attorneys representing several towns, like Cortland, are writing HUD to protest burdensome fair housing mandates that go far beyond those that were agreed to in 2009 in a settlement with HUD. A letter by Cortland Town Attorney Tom Wood agrees or expresses a common dilemma. Here's what it says, and this sums it up pretty well. Cortland is mostly residential and has only a few vacant parcels that could be developed for commercial use. In order to stabilize the tax base among the most affordable in Westchester County, the town board needs to encourage the development of commercial property for commercial use. Rob Astorino, the Westchester County executive, said, "What they are trying to do is to say discrimination and zoning is the same thing. They are not. Discrimination will not be tolerated in our community. I won't tolerate it. Zoning, though, protects what can and cannot be built in a neighborhood." And so here's what you need to understand. They're going to twist and manipulate the zoning rules and go in and say, you must have low-income housing in a wealthy neighborhood or a wealthy city. Westchester, for the record, by the way, if you don't know what Westchester County is, it's just north of New York City. And it is probably like on the top 5 wealthiest counties in the state in terms of per capita income and the housing cost. Not in the state, in the nation, excuse me. And here's the problem. Westchester is very wealthy because everybody who lives there lives in Westchester County but works in New York because the commute is less than an hour and a half. And they make, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in New York and then move up to Westchester County where they can buy these McMansions. Well, the HUD came in and sued Westchester County and said, you are discriminating because of housing pricing on minorities. Now, come on, that's not really true. If you're a minority and you work in New York and you make a couple of $100,000 a year and your wife works in New York and she makes a couple of $100,000 a year, you too can afford to buy a $1.2 million ranch in Westchester County. So, I mean, the point of this thing is that what they did to Westchester is they went in and said, you've got to zone for low-income housing. You must. It's not optional. And they sued them to make it happen, and the courts agreed with them. And so they agreed in a settlement, rather than go through the long court process, they agreed in a settlement in 2009 to do this. But now the HUD is going back in and saying, you have to take these spots that would ordinarily be reserved for commercial use. Let's say somebody wants to build a strip mall, and you've got to turn that into low-income housing. Boom. Get it? So now you've lost the commercial tax base. You don't have the high residential value tax base that would have been built. So if it wasn't going to be built into a strip mall with a high tax base, it would have been ordinarily built into a residential community with a bunch more McMansions that would also pay high taxes, right? But this way, they're forcing low-income housing on there. So what somebody's going to do is go in there and build cluster housing, townhouses and condominiums and such, and those come with virtually no tax base because the value is down. And so what they're doing is forcing communities to build low-income housing. And for all intents and purposes, it changes everything about the community. It changes the school tax base because now all these low-income people come in with a passel full of kids and they've all got to go to school. So pressure is on the school system to pay for all this influx of new residents who all have kids. And let's be honest, I mean, facts statistically prove this. Wealthier people have less kids. That's just the simple reality of it. People on welfare have more kids because they're less cognizant and less respectful of themselves, their families, and what their obligations are because they're completely dependent upon government funding for food and housing and everything anyway. And so they don't concern themselves with, can I really afford to bring another child into this world? Their attitude is, how can I afford not to? Because I get more money if I do. Or I just don't care, which is equally pathetic, I might add. So the simple truth is this. What this will do is change the tone, the tenor, and the scope of every community in the nation. Because when you have an influx of people who are low income and force these schools and so forth and the community resources to be stressed, including law enforcement, school systems, shopping, all of these other areas, parks and community services, all of that gets stressed. Fire departments now have more houses to put out. Ambulances have more people to go to the hospital. I mean, all of these things get stressed. It's just not right. And it's not government's place to do that. They are manipulating the whole premise of free enterprise and free markets. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not the foundation upon which this nation was built. You mark my words and watch what will happen. This will be a travesty for America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Thank you for sharing with us today. I appreciate your attendance with us this morning. We've got some big things coming up. Please stick with us. Watch our Facebook page, our website at americasvoicenow.org and facebook.com/americasvoicenow. Find a copy of this video at YouTube and share the link with friends via email so that they can get a benefit of whatever we're doing out here and talking about every day. You can find that at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. That's youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We're going to also be streaming a bunch of other radio hosts shortly on the AmericanPatriot.tv channel. I'll give you more updates about that soon. Thanks so much for being with us. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you on Monday morning bright and early for a new 2-hour show. Have a wonderful day. Educate, inform, motivate, and activate yourself and everyone in your circle of influence.